In this podcast episode, Danny Jones is joined by guests Andrew Bustamante, a former CIA spy, FBI Special Agent Jim DiOrio, and Julian Dorey. The conversation revolves around various topics, including the origin of the term spook when referring to CIA or FBI agents, the concept of glowing in the dark, and their experiences at a strip club. The discussion begins with the origin of the term spook as a reference to CIA or FBI agents. The guests speculate that it may have originated from the association of spies with ghosts, as they often disappear and operate covertly. They also touch upon the idea of glowing in the dark, which is often mentioned in conspiracy theories. While they find it amusing, they admit to not fully understanding its meaning. The conversation then shifts to the guests' experiences at a strip club during their weekend together. They discuss how they received more attention from other men recognizing them from TV and podcasts than from the female strippers. They share humorous anecdotes and jokes about their time at the strip club. The discussion then turns to Andrew Bustamante's TV show, Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, which explores strange phenomena and unknown aerial phenomena. They clarify that the show does not focus on Skinwalker Ranch itself but rather investigates other geographical areas in the United States with similar phenomena. They emphasize the importance of exploring the 2% of unexplained phenomena rather than focusing on the 98% that can be easily explained. The guests also touch upon the existence of black programs and black budgets, which are classified and undisclosed government projects. They discuss the need for secrecy in certain operations and the importance of funding approval for such projects. They mention the role of whistleblowers and differentiate between genuine whistleblowers who expose wrongdoing and those who may not be mentally stable. The conversation then delves into the topic of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, and the possibility of extraterrestrial life. While the guests acknowledge the existence of UAPs and believe that we are not alone in the universe, they approach the subject with skepticism. They suggest that many of the sightings could be attributed to Chinese spy balloons or classified projects by organizations like DARPA. The guests also discuss the credibility of David Grush, a whistleblower who claims to have knowledge of undisclosed projects and biological entities not of this planet. They mention the mixed reactions and opinions surrounding his testimony and the presence of individuals like James Clapper and George Knapp during his congressional hearing. The conversation continues with a discussion on the government's role in keeping the American people willfully ignorant. They argue that the government prefers the public to be passive, calm, and content, rather than actively involved in decision-making. They also touch upon the history of voting rights and the evolution of the voting age in relation to military drafts. The discussion continues with a mention of the drinking age for cadets and the correlation between liberal politics and the UFO narrative. The guests speculate whether governments use the UFO agenda as a distraction or a way to appease the masses. They note that countries with leftist governments tend to be more interested in UFO topics. The conversation then shifts to the role of government and how it is perceived by the public. The guests compare the Obama and Trump administrations, with Obama being seen as a more traditional parent figure who kept information hidden, while Trump was more transparent and ran the White House like a business. They discuss how Trump's approach divided the American people and made them question the government's actions. The guests also touch on the personal experiences of Jim DiOrio, who served as an Army Ranger and worked alongside Mike Pompeo and Mark Esper, both of whom held high positions in the Trump administration. They discuss the tension between Trump and career politicians, as well as the ego-driven nature of politics. The conversation then turns to the recent security breach involving Bobby Kennedy's campaign. The guests express their concern over the lack of security measures and the potential threats Kennedy may face. They highlight the importance of having an advanced team and experienced personnel to ensure the safety of political candidates. The discussion then delves into the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The guests highlight the three layers they are monitoring: the situation in Russia, NATO's support for Ukraine, and the internal dynamics of Ukraine itself. They discuss recent changes in Ukraine's defense ministry and the challenges posed by corruption. They also mention the reluctance of NATO and the United States to provide further support due to concerns about accountability and financial constraints. The guests continue by emphasizing the need for transparency and accountability in government. They stress the importance of addressing corruption and ensuring the safety of political candidates. They also express their hope for a peaceful resolution to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The conversation continues with a discussion about the recent release of UFO videos by the Pentagon and the government's acknowledgement of their existence. Andrew Bustamante, who has a background in intelligence and counterintelligence, explains that the government's decision to release these videos is a significant shift in their approach to UFOs. He suggests that this could be a strategic move to divert attention from other classified programs or to prepare the public for future revelations. The conversation then shifts to China and its growing influence in the world. Julian Dorey, who has experience working in China, explains that China's rise as a global power is a result of careful planning and execution of long-term strategies. He highlights China's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to create a network of infrastructure projects across Asia, Europe, and Africa, as a key example of their strategic approach. Jim DiOrio, an FBI special agent, discusses the challenges of dealing with China's intelligence operations and their use of technology for espionage. He explains that China's intelligence agencies are highly sophisticated and have been successful in stealing sensitive information from the United States and other countries. He emphasizes the need for increased awareness and counterintelligence efforts to protect national security. The conversation then turns to the situation in Ukraine and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Andrew Bustamante provides a detailed analysis of the events leading up to the downing of a plane carrying Wagner Group mercenaries, including the role of Prawn, the generals in charge of the Russian military offensive, and the involvement of private military contractors. He presents three predominant theories about the cause of the plane crash: mechanical failure due to sabotage, internal explosion from a bomb, or external explosion from an air-to-air missile. The guests discuss the challenges faced by Ukraine in the conflict with Russia and the role of NATO countries in supporting Ukraine. They highlight the divisions within NATO and the pressure faced by European countries to prioritize their own domestic issues over the conflict in Ukraine. Andrew Bustamante argues that Ukraine cannot win the war without NATO's support and that Russia is aware of this, using it to their advantage. The conversation continues with a discussion about the possibility of Prawn, the leader of the Wagner Group, still being alive. While the evidence suggests that he is dead, Andrew Bustamante acknowledges that there is a small possibility that he could still be alive. He analyzes the available data, including the manifest of the aircraft, the recognition of his death by the Wagner Group, and Putin's public acknowledgement of his death. He also considers the possibility of sabotage by Axis agents or an air-to-air missile as the cause of the plane crash. The conversation then shifts to China, with Bustamante and DiOrio discussing the country's rise as a global power and its increasing influence in various regions. They highlight China's economic growth, military capabilities, and its use of technology for surveillance and control. They also discuss the Chinese government's human rights abuses, including the treatment of Uyghur Muslims and the crackdown on pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. The discussion then turns to Russia and the conflict in Ukraine. DiOrio expresses his skepticism about the official narrative surrounding the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 in 2014. Suggesting that the plane may have been brought down by an external explosion rather than a missile. He also speculates about the presence of intelligence organizations in Russia and Ukraine, and the possibility of circular reporting and misinformation. The conversation delves into the topic of regime change in Russia, with DiOrio questioning whether the United States has an interest in overthrowing the Russian government. Bustamante argues that chaos in Russia would be beneficial for the United States, as it weakens the country and creates opportunities for American interests. They also discuss the leadership of Russian President Vladimir Putin and his reputation in the West. The conversation then touches on the state of the FBI, with DiOrio sharing his observations about the agency's internal dynamics. He suggests that there is a lack of motivation and innovation among FBI personnel, with many individuals simply waiting for their pensions. He also criticizes FBI Director Christopher Wray for his inability to lead and answer difficult questions. The podcast episode continues with a discussion about the politicization of investigations, using the example of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. DiOrio explains that the investigation was mishandled by former FBI Director James Comey, who made decisions outside of the established process. He also suggests that the current investigations into former President Donald Trump are politically motivated and lack proper procedures. The guests also touch on the issue of corruption within government agencies, particularly the FBI and CIA. They discuss the impact of nepotism, favoritism, and the revolving door between government and private contracting. They argue that these practices can lead to a lack of qualified personnel and a loss of institutional knowledge. DiOrio shares his frustration with the pension system in government agencies, noting that many employees stay in their positions solely for the pension benefits. He argues that this can lead to a lack of motivation and a decline in productivity. Bustamante adds that the system often traps employees, preventing them from pursuing other opportunities and stifling innovation. The conversation then turns to the topic of misinformation and speculation. The guests discuss the dangers of filling gaps in knowledge with speculation and the need for evidence-based analysis. They emphasize the importance of objective and critical thinking in evaluating information. The guests also touch on the issue of private contracting within intelligence agencies. They discuss the practice of hiring former government employees as private contractors and the potential for abuse and overpricing. They argue that this can lead to a loss of talent and a waste of taxpayer money. The conversation then shifts to the topic of China and its growing influence in the world. Bustamante and DiOrio discuss China's strategies and tactics, including their focus on technology manufacturing and their ability to outmaneuver the United States in terms of influence and power. They also touch on China's relationship with Russia and the potential implications for global geopolitics. Bustamante argues that China is doing all the right things to increase its influence and that the United States has struggled to effectively counter their rise. He points out that China's leader, Xi Jinping, is intentionally playing the influence game and letting other countries, such as the United States, create chaos while China steadily increases its power. The conversation then delves into the question of whether Xi Jinping envisions a war with the United States. Bustamante argues that war is the last thing Xi Jinping wants, as he is already achieving his goals through economic and influence warfare. He suggests that China's long-term plan is focused on winning a financial war rather than engaging in direct military conflict. DiOrio adds that the United States needs to be willing to take risks and do things that may be considered unethical in order to protect its interests and prevent China from surpassing it as a global power. He acknowledges that this may involve engaging in covert operations, assassinations, and other controversial tactics. The conversation also touches on the topic of power transitions throughout history and whether war is a necessary component of such transitions. While there is a historical precedent for war accompanying power transitions, Bustamante argues that it is not necessarily a requirement for every transition. He suggests that the future may be different and that a blend of strategies and tactics may be employed to maintain or shift power. The podcast concludes with a discussion about the potential for a war between Russia and Ukraine and the implications for China. Bustamante suggests that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine could escalate and potentially draw the United States into a war with Russia. While China may not be directly involved in the conflict, it could benefit from the chaos and depletion of Western resources, allowing it to pursue its own goals, such as the takeover of Taiwan. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.